in Besdin, then he would not have to get permission. Okay, so the Gemara starts, Mei Sorich Litul Rishus, he has to get Rishus. Tanya, Tanya, we have a price. So Rebbe Omer, Rebbe explains, Yarshin Shiyarshu, heirs that inherit. So Gemara says, well, every year inherits. What are we talking about? Umi Ika Yarshin Shalo Yarsu. Yarsi, is it there's such a case of an heir who doesn't inherit? So the Gemara Ella Omer Rabbi Yochanan clarifies it. Shiyarshu karka velo yarshu ksafim. Okay, when they go to the Bezdin, if you have karka, the karka is meshubid to loans. In other words, it's as if there's a mortgage on the land, and the creditor, the one who you owe money to, can take away property, sell it, take his share that he owed, and then give you the rest of the geld. Okay? Lamed Amid Beis, 30 side 2 or B. So he's saying, but money, metaltalin, cannot be meshubah. So Rabbi Yochanan explained that what Rebbe's talking about is if the heirs inherited land. Now here's the deal. Sometimes you inherit a lot of land and it's easy to get the loan paid off. Sometimes you inherit a piece of junk property in the heart of Baltimore and you can't even pay somebody to take it away from you. So now the Gemara goes into that issue. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Heiniach Milo Machat, where the guy has the Milo Machat literally means the amount of a pin, but it's an idiom for a very small, not valuable piece of property. So where I understand, if the piece of land is so insignificant, all that the borrower, the lender can collect is the actual cash value of that little piece of land. Okay, because it's a non-recourse loan, right? Mole cardom, which literally means the full value of an axe, but it's an idiom for a large tract of land. Gavo mole cardom, he could take up to and including the entire value of that large piece of land, which is very likely to exceed the amount of the debt. So they would take the land, they would sell it, or the buyer could remortgage it. He gets his money, and okay, or rather he gets to take the meiser up to that value. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan Omer afilu hiniach molei machat. Even now, he was explaining Rebbe, but now Rabbi Yochanan says, afilu hiniach molei machat, even if it's only a tiny piece of land, gavoi marlei kardom, the very existence of the land gives the lender the right to take away the truma, the meiser loni, until he gets all his money back. Okay? Kemaisa the katina de abba, because there was a small, tiny, almost worthless field, and the two litigants came to Abaya, and Abaya said, no, if you own land, he can take all, and you're still defined as poor, or you're still a Levi, which you obviously are still, then he can collect his whole payment back out of your meiser.
This is where I say during a principle that you have to be a landowner in order to make an effective principle.
That's one. That's a shita, and that's the point.
Right.
Because your land is what he would have taken from you. If it's metaltalin, it's definitionally a non-recourse loan in halakha. All right. Tana Rabbanan. Now, we introduced this notion of using produce as that you're entitled to take as collateral for a loan. So we're going to go into now other cases that in that general topic, okay? Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis teach. Yisrael Shomer LeLevi, a regular Jew who's a farmer, says to a Levi who's entitled to Meiser Rishon, Meiser Yesh Lecha Biyadi. I happen to have in my warehouse a bunch of grain, which is your Meiser, belongs to you, because it's your Meiser. Okay, this is no loan on this. But now, but now the guy is saying, and I want to keep that money, that in lieu of you paying the loan, or I want to, okay. So then he, Ein Choshishin L'Trumas Meiser Shabbat. Remember that a Levi, when he collects the Meiser, has to give a tenth of that Meiser to a Kohen. Nobody can eat that tenth. So if that isn't rectified, I think they call it in English rectified. If they don't do a tikkun, then nobody can eat any of that grain because it has one out of every 10 seeds of that grain belongs to a Kohen, and they're all mixed in since nobody said it's this part over here. So nobody can eat anything. But we're saying, if the Bryce is saying here, if a Jew says to a Levi, I have your material, he does not have to be concerned that there's Meiser in it. So the understanding here is that the Levi has other grain elsewhere. And there are a lot of Kohanim say where the farmer lives. So the Levi says to himself, I will make the grain in the farmer's warehouse my Trumas Meiser, so I can freely eat my other grain in my own warehouse. That's the assumption here. But we're saying he doesn't do that. We don't have to worry that he did that. Why? Because it's an indeterminate amount. And the Levi would not give a warehouse full, he'd give a specific amount. On the other hand, if the Israel says, Kur Meiser Yesh Lecha Biyadi, I have an exact measure. The example is a kur, which is a volume measure. I have this exact amount of your grain in my storeroom. Then he does have to be worried that is Trumas Meiser. Because the Levi can have 9 kur in his own warehouse and say, oh, there's exactly 1 kur by Burr. And there's 2 Kohanim sitting in the room with Burr. So I'll make Burr's holdings my Trumas Meiser, and then I'll tell Sid to go get it from Burr. So Maita Omar. So the Gemara, this is a troublesome brisa, which we'll discover in a minute. I mean, it doesn't really work for a lot of reasons, or that shouldn't happen like that for a lot of reasons. So Maita Omar, what is this brisa, which is rather enigmatic, as we will see, talking about? Omar Abaya Hachikamer, here's what it is saying. Yisrael Sha'omer Levi Meiser Sheyesh Lecha Biyadi V'Cheilech Damov. I am holding a bunch of grain. That's your Meiser. Instead of you having to rent a truck and get some guys and haul it away, I'll pay you for it. I'll give you money instead. Okay? So the Levi says, fine. I want $50. I give you the $50. Now, is there Trumas Meiser? A Jew can eat Truma Meiser, but a Jew can't eat Truma. Only a Kohen can eat Truma. Do I have to be worried? Ein choshishin shema asa'u trumas meiser al muk. That maybe you made this grain in my possession, trumas meiser, on grain you had in another location. Okay, I don't have to worry about that. That's what the Brycer means. On the other hand, kur meiser yesh lecha biyadi v'heilach dama. I have this one big basket of grain, kur's worth, and I'd rather, instead of you having to come and get it, I'll give you money for it. In that case, you take the money. In that case, choshishin. Shema ya'asu trumas meiser al makam acher, that you did make that into trumas meiser, and I'd have to talk it out with you, or we'd have to agree to give it to a kohen. Okay, so that's what the Bay's effort at explaining the brisa. But the Gemara says a piece of data you need to know. If I have a pile of grain right here on this table, and then I have a 9 times larger pile of grain right next to it, also on the table, then there's no issue of my using the smaller pile as the Meiser Rishon. If I have 9 huge, 9 tons of grain in Pittsburgh, and I have 1 ton of grain in Boca, although technically I could make all that the Truma Meiser on the Pittsburgh grain, you shouldn't do that because you might be off, and it doesn't look right, it's not together. So the Gemara answers, Atu Barishoy Askinan. Are we talking about an evil guy? This Levi is a lowlife that he would take this Trumas Meiser in Boca on grain that's in Pittsburgh. That doesn't have to, could be on the other side of town in a warehouse. But even though it's technically correct, that's not how people behave. So would that be like that? Obviously not, the Gemara says. So is the implication. So therefore that Abaya can't be the right reason. Ella Omer Misharshia Berei the Rabba Idi, fellow named Rav Misharshia, explains a different version. Hachi Kamar, here's what the Bryce is trying to say. Yisrael Sha Omer Leben Levi. The Yisrael says to the Levi who originally owned that material, who died and his son inherited. Okay? I have in my warehouse Meiser that used to be your father's that you just inherited. Let me pay you for it. Same story, but it's the next generation. Now here, there's no way of doing a breira because the guy's dead. I have no idea whether he used it. And there's no way of finding out. In the first case, if I have a choshesh because it's a kur, I can ask you. But here, nobody can ask. You're dead, right? So, the Bryce is saying we make a general rule if it's an indefinite amount, if it's not a fixed, weighted, marked it, stamped it, this amount. Ein choshishin shabo also aviv trumas meiser al makam acher. We assume that it's the father did not take out meiser, trumas meiser from it, and I can deal with it on that basis and give 1/10 to the Kohen, or make a deal with you that you'll cover the 10th and I'll pay you a little bit less. Okay, kur. If there's exact amount, then we do assume we do assume that the father did use that as trumas meiser. Okay. Again, we're going to ask the same question, but they're not in the same place. Would a chaver, would a frum guy do such a thing to make Trumas Meiser somewhere not where all the other grain is? Certainly not. So that can't be the answer either. So you see, the Bryce is getting more and more enigmatic. Yeah.
No.
Oh, I thought you were. Okay. So Omar Ella Rav Ashi says, Hachika Omar. Here's what we're talking about. Ben Yisrael Shomer Levi. This time, the owner of the warehouse inherited it, and his father died. So he doesn't know exactly what the deal that his father made with the Levi. And Kach Aimer Li Abba, this is what my father told me. Meiser biyadi. Some of Bob's Meiser is in the warehouse that you're going to inherit from me. He says this on his deathbed, say, Oh Meiser avicha biyadi. Or maybe you're also an heir. And my father said some of your father's Meiser was in my warehouse. Okay, exactly the other way around. If it's an indefinite amount, we're worried that there may be Trumas Meiser still in it, or even worse, that all of it is Trumas Meiser. Kavan de lo keats, because it's not a fixed amount, and you are allowed to estimate Truma. You don't have to weigh everything and get it down to the last grain. You can take approximate amount, 1%, 2%, whatever you want to give. Okay? Lo have misaken le balabayas. Since it's an indefinite amount, we assume that they didn't go through all the various processes because you want to prepare it for market. So you weigh it, you take out your truma, you take out your meiser, but you can't do all that until you get a reasonable estimate of how much it's worth. So he is flipping the brisa, and he's saying that if it's an indefinite amount, we're worried. Kur meiser biyadi, but if it's a fixed amount, oh, kur meiser lavicha biyadi, or it's your father's kur. Now, ein choshishin l'srumas meiser shabo, because now it's a fixed amount. We assume you're putting that in a package and saying 1 kur of grain for sale, and that everything needed to rectify it to make it edible has been done. Okay, so kavan de keats, since it's an exact amount, takune takne balabayas, that the owner took care of all the trumas and maestras that might have been needed to be taken. Okay, now the next issue is, how can a non-Levi or a non-Kohen, but in this case Levi, take truma on behalf, trumas meiser, on behalf of the Levi? Mistama, there's no cell phones. I couldn't text you and you text me back permission, right? So I'm acting as your agent Shelo B'fanav. I'm taking the trumas meiser out of your grain without having cleared it with you. So I'm acting as your agent to do it without your direct permission. Is that allowed? So, okay, there's a simple. Well, there's a simple benefit. There's a simple answer that you can be sort of, but that's not. But we're talking here that would we're talking here about a diraisa dikadin. We're talking about tevel. So we want to have a better basis than just a memra. So we're going to go like this. V'chi yesh lo reshus lebal abayis lisram trumas meiser. Does the owner of the warehouse have the right to act on the Levi's behalf to take the trumas meiser? And the Gemara says, hey, absolutely. And they prove it not from a general rule, but from a pasuk, which is a much solider proof. Okay? Abba Eliezer ben Gamlahi, that this brisa, the author of this brisa, the opinion in this brisa is Eliezer ben Gamla, who is quoted in a brisa. Abba Eliezer ben Gamla Aimer, v'nechshav lachem trumoseichem. The pasuk says, be careful, accurately deal with your trumos. It's a plural. Okay? So the Gemara turned the page. Bishtei trumos haklasav midaber. The pasuk is talking about two different kinds of truma. Achas truma gedayla v'achas trumas meiser. One is the truma that the farmer has to take and give to a Kohen, and the other is the truma that the Levi has to take and give to the Kohen after he gets the Meiser Rishon. So the pasuk allows it, okay? Kishem shetruma gedayla niteles be'omer ubamachshava. It even goes further. Since the farmer can designate truma, he doesn't have to actually get a shovel and take out the grain. He can say the northeast corner 2% is going to a Kohen, or he could just even think it, and it would be truma. It would be chol. Even b'machshava, ukashem sheyesh lo reshus lebal habayis lisram trumas gedolah, since he has full authority on his own grain to take trumas gedolah, and the pasuk mentioned two trumas. Kach yesh lo reshus lebal habayis lisram trumas meiser. So too, he has the absolute authority to act on the Levi's behalf to take the trumas meiser. Okay.
The interesting thing about trumas meiser is that it came about because the Levium, after the first base of Mikdash, when they went to Bavel, most of them stayed there. And as a result, they were punished to give trumas meiser to the Kohen.
Okay. All right, fine. No, they weren't given truma, and it was all given to the Kohen by the farmer. The Torah gives trumas rishon, meiser rishon to a Levi. The Chachamim made a punishment that the meiser rishon would go to a Levi, but that's off the page, and we're way behind. So just as a general rule, let's stick to the page. Okay, next Mishnah. Maniach peres lios ma'afrish aleim trumas and maisros. If one makes a pile of vegetables or grain, which is now mechuyev in trumas and maisros, okay, if it's all scattered or unharvested, or you didn't complete the harvested, you're not mechuyev yet, and you could even eat an apple. But once you pile it up, it's considered you finished the harvest and you're ready to process it. And so now you did that, and now you have to take trumas and maisros. But there's also meiser sheni, which most years goes to Jerusalem. It has kedusha. So ma'os lios mafrish aleim meiser sheni, he designates money, coins, to be, and he's paid the meiser sheni on it. So now the meiser sheni is normal food, and the money has to go to Jerusalem, and he has to go to a fancy restaurant in Jerusalem and blow the wad that way. Okay, mafrish aleihem becheskes rehen kayam. He's got two warehouses. One is closer to home than the other. So we talked before about the distance between them, but technically it could be even a great distance. So for convenience sake, he wants to do the trumas and maisros from the proximate warehouse rather than the more distant warehouse. Okay? But the last time he went to the distant warehouse was sometime last week. Theoretically, could have burned down. Could have been a flood and the grain all ruined. So he mafresh alehem b'cheskes she'en kayamim. We give the grain in the distant warehouse a chazaka that if it was there last week and the week before, it's still there. Okay? Now, so he does take his trumas and maestros from the closer warehouse on the distant stuff. And everything is copacetic, except he goes to the distant warehouse in order to pick up the grain and sell it. And im avdu, when he finds out that it's gone. What?
Lost.
That's correct. I said that, by the way. So the Mishnah says he has to be concerned. Now, in other words, he took his trumas and maestros on Tuesday. On Friday, he goes to the distant warehouse and it's burned down. So how far back in time does he have to go to say, gee, I took trumas and maestros improperly because that didn't exist anymore? So the Mishnah says me'es la'es for a 24-hour period. But it doesn't define when that 24-hour.
So if it went Friday, he's good because it's past the 24 hours.
Or maybe it's too far back. And if the fire was on Tuesday, maybe he only heard about the fire. Right. So we don't know. In other words, it just says meis leis from one, which is understood to mean from one moment to the same moment a day later. In other words, from the moment of the fire, 24 hours forward, backward, we don't know. And the Gemara is going to go into it. Divrei Rebbe Lazar, that's what Rebbe Lazar says. Now, a new point, since we're talking about trumas and maestros, grapes that are used for wine also have to have trumas and maestros taken. But there's a knach when it comes to grapes. If the grapes, the juice in the grapes or the juice in the barrel becomes vinegar, it sours, then it's no longer called wine. So you can't use vinegar to do trumas and maestros on fresh grape juice or on fermented grape juice wine. So the Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, he b'shlosha prakim bodkin es hayayin. There are 3 occasions where you have to check your wine to make sure that it is not sour. Okay? Bekidam shel motzei hachag. Kidam is the name of the east wind, which is where Chamsin. I think that's what they call it in Israel. That comes in the fall, usually after Sukkot, and it can be destructive. So you have to check your wine at that point. Ubemoitzas samader, which at the point when the grapes start forming, because if they don't have a proper sugar content, they'll be sour. Okay. Ubeshas kenisas mayim boiser. And at the time that the grapes plump up. I don't know how to explain it better. He calls it at the time the liquid enters the unripe grapes. So when the grapes plump up. What? Right. Okay, fine. Everybody understands it. So now the Gemara wants to know my me'es leis. What do we mean when we said me'es leis? Okay. Rabbi Yochanan Omer me'es leis shel bedika. At the time he went to the warehouse. and he discovered that his grain is missing or on fire or ruined by flood, go back 1 24-hour period from there. And that's all you have to be choshesh for. So if somebody, okay, and that's one opinion. Rebbe Elazar ben Antigonus, Amir Mishum, Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Yanai, he says another time, Me'es le'es shel hanacha, the 24 hours after the last time you checked. So if you went there on Tuesday, and it was fine, then you went back on Friday to pick up your grain, and it was the fire, you have to be worried about Wednesday. So if you did your Trumas and Maestris on other material on Wednesday, that would be a problem. Would be. Again, one said, when you discover it, you go back 24 hours, that's the time you're worried about. The other said, what if you went there 2 weeks ago? It's the day after you last checked is what me'es le'es is. Okay. So that's much more difficult to hop because it could have been a pretty big gap. Okay, so Tanan, we are going to challenge with that Rebbe Elazar ben Antigonus. If the grains or the money that you were mafresh the truma, the meiser sheni on disappears, you worry about 24 hours. According to the one Rabbi Yochanan, who said it's the 24 hours after you get, before you get there and find that it's not there anymore. You look puzzled.
Oh, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm always puzzled.
That makes sense. Elamanda Esa is shel hanacha, from the time you put it there or last checked on it. Hi, me'es la'es. Why does it use this the words 24 hours? It should say ad me'es la'es maboile. It should say for the next 24 hours. So the lashon of the Mishnah does not, the diktuk of the Mishnah does not support Rav Elazar's pshat. Kasha. Gemara says that's problematic. And then we're going on. Divrei Rebbe Elazar says this again. We're still talking about the 24 hours. Omer Rebbe Elazar, chilukin alav chavei Rebbe Elazar. We just talked about Rebbe Elazar's understanding of it's 24 hours after the last time you were there when it was good. The other rabbis argue with that. Rav Elazar, Omar Rav Elazar ben Pedas, a different Rav Elazar. And the English adds in, and Rashi adds in Rav ben Pedas, rather than ben Antigonus, different Rav Elazar. Cholkin alav chavei Rav, he says the other rabbis don't agree with him. Ad Rabbi Elazar, the Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus, the Tanan, because there's a Mishnah elsewhere. And now we're talking about missing material, right? I wanted to take truma on the grain in the warehouse, but it's missing. So now we're going to segue to a mikvah with missing water. Okay, that's the connection. Yeah. That was just an gaburka. The Mishnah, since we were talking about trumas and maasros on grain, the Mishnah says, by the way, before you take trumas and maasros on wine, you got to make sure it's still wine. That's just a side which we may or may not ever get to. Okay, it's just a second clause in the Mishnah on a similar topic, but we're not dealing with that yet.
But if grain had spoiled
What? I don't understand your question. If you have grain in a storehouse, it's called tevel. You harvested all the grain, you put it in a warehouse. Once you put it in a warehouse, you're mechuyev to take trumas and maestros.
Even if it's spoiled and you can't use
No, if it's you throw it away.
it? Okay.
But wine is more likely, the weather affects the quality of the produce of the grapes. Much more. If you get seeds, there's seeds. Now, it's true, a mouse can get in there and eat some of them. But unless there's a flood, the grain is not going to ferment. So the grain is more stable product than wine.
But if it has fermented because it got flooded or something.
Make beer.
No, you can't
If you have fermented grain, make beer.
Right, right.
Okay, next. Okay, mikveh shenimdar v'nimtza chaser. You have a mikveh that's exactly 40 saw, and it's regularly measured. And this time, let's say it's measured every Sunday morning. So Sunday morning, you go in and you measure the mikveh, and you find there's not 40 saw of water in it. So that's the problem. Kol taharas shenasu al gabav lemafreya ben berishus ayachid ben berishus harabim tameos. Whether it's a personal private mikveh or it's a public mikveh, if it's found lacking in appropriate volume, everything that was toiveled between the last inspection and now is not toiveled. Okay? Everything from your wife to your
What
waffle.
does the husband do if he finds the wife went into an unkosher mikvah?
He gets caressed. Or he brings a korban and he
All
clears himself up. Or he pleads with God, it wasn't my fault. My wife didn't measure the mikveh, and God says, you should have measured. Gotcha. All right. So pshita, the halaikin. It's obvious that in the previous case, they would have an argument. Miles is saying, what are you going to try and tell me? My mafreya, what do you mean you go back in time? Me'es la'es. So when I read it, I said you go all the way back to the last time it's inspected. But Rav Elazar ben Pidas would say you would only anybody that went to the mikveh, anybody brought a keli. It shouldn't have been Sunday, it should have been Monday. Anybody that brought a keli to that mikveh the day before, me'es la'es, because the water evaporated recently, we're assuming. Or a lot of people toiveled and they had water on their bodies and they diminished the mikveh. He says, me'es la'es. So Kamash Malan, Rav Elazar ben Pidas says, no, it's not just 24 hours. It's all the way back to the last known time it was correct. Okay, so that's the argument. Now, new case. We're back. Now we come on to the wine. And we're going to get into a bunch of obscure agadata here about the types of winds and their effects. So we'll just go through it as best we can. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda Omer begimel prakim 3 times in the year. You have in the growth process, you have to check your wine and make sure it's not vinegar. Tana, we have a brisa. Bekidam shel motzei hachag shel hatekufa. Okay, by the kidum wind that comes after Sukkot, when Sukkot comes after the vernal equinox. Remember, the Jewish calendar is 211 days or whatever, the Jewish 254 days, and the secular calendar is 365 days. So there is approximately 11 days, because there are adjustments, that the Jewish activities shift earlier. And every couple of years, they add a month to adjust it. But it is possible for Sukkot to come after the equinox and sometimes before the equinox. Only when Sukkot is after the equinox and the east wind blows after Sukkot. That means the fall, Chamsen, that's what you called it. Okay. That's now what we're talking about. Okay. And Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda teaches us the Gimel Prakin Meichrin Es Hatavua. This will connect, trust me. 3 times a year, it's customary to put grain on sale. Okay? B'shas HaZera, at the time that farmers begin planting. In order to plant, they need seeds. So they go to the seed owner's warehouse and they buy seeds from him to plant. Okay? B'frois Pesach, and the planting season extends, so a lot of grain gets sold just before Pesach. Okay, so we have before the planting season, B'shas HaZera, during the extended planting season, and just before Pesach. Next case, B'shlosha Prakim Moichrin Esayayim. There are 3 times in the year where you get the best, and that's presumably you're getting the best price because all the farmers need seed. And there are 3 times in the year where you'll get the best price for wine because Jews need to buy wine. Then the price of Pesach, just before Pesach, we all put in our wine order, right? Of the pros hachag, just before Shavuos. Okay, I'm sorry. Of the pros hatzeres, just before Sukkot. Of the pros hachag, and just before Sukkot. No. Befros hatzeres is Shavuos, and befros hachag is Sukkot. In the Gemara and then the Chumash, Atzeres is Sukkot, not Shmini Atzeres, and Chag means alone, standalone means Sukkot. Okay. Over Shemen, when it comes to olive oil, the olives grow at the right point of whatever degree of ripeness. They harvest them, they press them, they now have great wine, oil to sell. But Atzeres v'Elech, after Shavuos and on until you run out of inventory. Okay, now, that's all lovely. But we're not farmers, we're old men in Boca. Why do we need to know this? Lamai Hilchasa, what halacha is applicable that we have to know this? Okay, Rava, you say Rapapa, maybe it was Rava, maybe it was Rapapa, Lishutvin, with if you are partners, if you're in the wine business and you're partners with Bob. So normally, if it's not the height of the season where the prices are the highest and you need money, you'd go to your partner and you say, look, I need money. Would you object to us selling some wine now? Even though we might not get the absolute best price, but you'll help me out with that you have to do. But at the height of the season, when the prices are high, I don't need your permission. I can just do it because I'm not in any way harming you. Okay, as long I can't steal it. I mean, I have to keep accurate records, but I don't need your permission. Okay, so the case would be if you have partners, this Bryce is telling you when you can sell without dealing with your partners. Come on, as the Allah my. So what about, you've got this just before Pesach. What about right after Pesach? Can you still sell without getting permission? Omer Rava explains, Kol Yuma Pirkehu, once the market opens, the normal behavior is to continue selling till you run out of inventory. So after the beginning of the market season, you're allowed to, each partner can do what he wants without negotiating with his buddies. Okay, until they run out of inventory. Now, since we've talked about that, it gets further and further afield. Since we mentioned that east wind that today is called Chamsin, we're going to do a pasuk about the east wind, and we're going to do drushes on it. Vayehi kezroyach hashemesh, when the sun comes up, v'yaman elakim ruach kodim harashis, when the sun comes up, God made a very strong eastern wind. Okay, so the Gemara says, my charishis. Why do they call that wind charishis? They're making an assumption that's the name of the wind. Omer Reb Yehuda, b'sha'a shemana sheves, when that wind blows, kola talamim biyam. It blows across, the east wind comes from the Mediterranean and blows across Israel. So it causes waves in the Mediterranean. Amarle Rava says to Rabbi Yehuda, if that's the case, what do you do with the rest of the pasuk? V'tach shemesh al rosh yoina v'yis alaf. And that this pasuk comes from Sefer Yoina. And the end of this pasuk, it got stormy. And then it says that the sun beat down on Yonah and he got heat stroke and he fainted. Okay? So clearly it was not cloudy and it was not rainy and the storm wasn't so bad yet that the heat of the sun was dissipated by the wind. Okay, so Ella Omar Rava, so Rava offers, I have a different explanation that fits the whole pasuk. B'shaha menasheves, at the time the wind blows, mashtokos kol haruchos mifoneho. That east wind is strong enough to break up the northwest and south winds. So when it hits those other winds, they no longer can get through. Okay? So that's the deal. So Hainu Diksiv, and the Gemara says, okay, that's a good explanation because there's another pasuk. Asher begodecha chamim, his clothing got hot. V'chashtik eretz medaray. And your clothing gets hot when the rest of the other winds are still and the south wind comes up from the south. Okay? So Omar Rav Talifta bar Rav Chista, Omar Rav Chista, so Rav Talifta quotes his father, Amasai bigodecha chamin, when do your clothing get hot? Bisha shehishkit eretz b'daram, when the earth is stilled by having a southern wind. Okay? Shebisha'a shemenach sheves, because when that east wind blows, mishtakes kol haruchos b'faneho, it breaks up all the other winds, and therefore there's no southern wind to warm your clothes. Okay, going to keep talking about wind. Rav Huna and Rav Chisda have Yosve, they were sitting together. Chalifa Azil Geneva Alayhu, and a fellow named Geneva was walking past them. Omer Chad Lechavre, one of the either Rav Chisda or Rav Huna said, Nekam Mikaime, let us stand up in front of Geneva. Devar Aryon, because he's a big Talmud Chacham. Amr le'idach, so whichever one said it, the other replied, Mekame, Palga'a, Nakum, you want to stand up before this quarrelsome fellow? He was about plichta to Mar Ukva. Mar Ukva was the Rosh Yeshiva, and this Geneva guy kept muchaing him. So although he's a big Talmud Chacham, he doesn't have the world's best midos, and he objects to rising before him. Ahadchi, by the time, before they could resolve this little debate, Asa Ahu Lagavaihu, this Geneva came over and approached them. Omer Lahu, he said to them, B'mai Askinasu, what topic are you learning? What Mishnah are you learning? What Gemara are you working out? They said to him, Amr Lahu, they said to him, Baruchos, we're talking about the winds. So Amr Lahu, so he said to them, Hachi Amr Rav Chanan Bar Rava Amr Rav. This is what Rav Chanan quoted Rav as saying, Dalid Ruchos Shenishvois Bechol Yom. There are 4 types of winds that come at 4 different times in the day. V'ruach Tzvainis Minasheves Imkulan, and the north wind continues blowing. Even though it's the time for the south wind or the west wind, the north wind continues blowing. Because if that wasn't true, without the north wind mixing into the other winds, the world would not be able to survive. Okay? V'ruach draimis kasha mikulan, and the hardest, most destructive wind is the south wind. The imole benetz ma'amida, and if it weren't for Nates ma'amida, or Ben Nates rather, that is presumed to be the name of an angel. If it weren't for this angel ma'amida that stands up in front of the south wind and causes it to divert or dissipate, okay, then Machareves kol ha'olam kula mepaneho, that the entire world would be destroyed by the south wind blowing over it. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Hamavina secha, by your wisdom, talking about Ya'aver Nates, this angel Nates, Yifrosh b'fanav v'seiman, he stretches his arms and his legs and his wings out and blocks the south wind. Okay, more wind. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Havu Yesve. Rava and Rav Nachman were sitting and learning. Have Cholif Azil Rav Nachman bar Yaakov be Yisev be Guharka de Rahava. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak rode by in a golden chariot. Okay, now you couldn't really see, or at least it might not be able to see who was in the chariot, because the Puris Alecha sarbola de karse. There were blue-white curtains hanging, blocking the vision of who's in the chariot. Okay? Rava Azil Agave. Rava got up. He figures, oh, he's a chashuv guy. I don't know who he is, but he's a gavir. I'm going to suck up to him. My lashon, he's a Tana, an Amara, he wouldn't suck up. Okay? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak lo Azil Agave. But Rav Nachman sat there. He didn't go over. And he said to himself, Omer, he said to himself, Dilma, who maybe he's one of the very rich guys that hangs out with the Reish Galusa, and Rava Tzorich Lahu. Rava, who deals with the Reish Galusa, he has to suck up to the big shots who hang out with the Reish Galusa. Anna lo tzricha lahu. I have nothing to do with them. I have no reason to make, to be polite and make nice. Okay? Udikas chaza the Rav Nachman Bar Yaakov Hava. But now, because Rava went over, Rav Nachman opens up the curtain and he could see who it is. And he's a humongous Talmud Chacham. Azul Agave, so he went over to him to show him kavod. Gale de Dare, and the man in the chariot took his cloak and bared his arms. Amar, and he said, Shadya Nashiv. It's hot in here because the wind is heating it up, so I have to take off the cloak that's wrapped around me. Okay, that wasn't okay. Now we're getting more wind, but now we're going to talk about the evil east wind. Omar Rava Hachi Omar Rav. This is what Rav said. Isha Mapeles Bo. If women who are pregnant are exposed to this vicious east wind, they will miscarry. Shmuel Aimer, Shmuel says, Afilu Margalis Shibayam Markevesbo. Even pearls in the ocean, in their oysters, exposed to this east wind, they dissolve or they break up. Okay, the English here says rot. Rabbi Yochanan Aimer, Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu Shichvas Zera b'ma'e isha masreches bo, that if a couple is intimate and he deposits semen, before the semen can fertilize an egg, it putrefies if she's exposed to the east wind. Okay. Now, Amar Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak, v'sholshtan mikra echad darshu. They didn't just make this stuff up. There's a pasuk that is hints to these three: the miscarriage, the pearls, and the semen rotting. Okay? Kihu ben Achim Yafri Yavo Kadim Ruach Hashem b'midbar ole v'yavesh b'mikairo. That's the pasuk. Even though he's fruitful among his friends, and east wind comes, the wind of Hashem from the desert, and his spring shall dry up. So now we're going to darshan the pasuk and show how each of these relate to those three things. Yevush Mekairoi, Zeh Mekairo Shel Isha. The word Mekairo in the pasuk refers to the womb of a woman, and that's the miscarriage case. Yecherev me yonoi, his fountain dries up. That's the man's aver. Zeh Shechvas Zera Shebe'amei Isha. That's the seed that the man deposited in the woman's vaginal tract. Hu Yisa Oitzer V'chol Kli Chamra. the pasuk continues, we didn't read this yet, that all the treasures of the ocean will be plundered in that pasuk. Zerma Goylis Shabayam, that's referring to the unharvested pearls. Okay. Amarava. The following thing he says, Ade Surah Hu. I learned the next explanation from the Talmidei Chachamim in the yeshiva in Surah. The Daike cry, and they were medayek the pasuk, and they found more information. Maiki hu ben Achim Yifri, what does it mean that he was fruitful among his friends? Rava says, Afilu Shaifta Bekupina Demara Rafia. Even a handle stuck into a hoe. Remember, the hoe has a metal top and a wooden handle, and there's a band that you stick the hoe in. The east wind dries up the wood, it shrinks, and the head of the hoe loosens. Okay? Rav Yosef Aimar, Afilu Sichta B'dafna Rafia. Even a peg, you make a hole in a wall, you stick a wooden peg in. Even indoors, the wooden peg shrinks and it gets loose in the wall. Ravacha bar Yaakov Aimer, Afilu Kanya v'kufta dafya. Even a wicker basket, the weaving loosens up from the east wind. Hadran Allah kol haget. Okay, so we're up to where we're supposed to be. You're responsible for learning the next stop on your own, and on Sunday we will pick up with the bottom of Lamed Beis or Mid Beis with the beginning of a new Inyan there. Okay.
You're gonna check homework?
What?
You're gonna check homework on Sunday?
You have to turn in your papers on Sunday morning. Okay. And if your exam, we're gonna have a bechina. Okay.
Oh, there's a lot of wind.
Yeah.
You're blowing a lot of wind, yeah. You got
Okay,
it.
so we're gonna pick up the 33. We'll start with 33.
Okay.
The bottom of the previous stuff.
Okay.
No,
Can I cheat on your paper?
We're
Can I cheat?
gonna start on Sunday at the end of
Right.
33.
I'm mamish hate. Got it.
Person's gonna review a little.
Yeah.
We got wind, that we know.
Okay, so this was a very windy
Okay.
Gemara.
Can you give me one
Have a,
minute?
I don't know the words. I really hate
One
got
minute.
it.
We're deep in 2 minutes.
have a great day.
Okay,
Good
be
job.
well.
Thank you
Have a
very
good night of Shabbos. Enjoy your longer nap tomorrow.
much.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.